actually, ladies and gentlemen, Panie I Panowie, I am very, very honored to actually start today lecture that's going to be conducted by Mr. John Hall, and it will hopefully be a series of events during lunchtime, so to bring you science and knowledge and wisdom and experience that is actually gathered here in our center. Feel free to loop me in any ideas that you have. We actually have a very fine and very strong bond with Cosmic Hub that is represented by Polish Space Agency, and I'm more than happy to introduce to you John Hall, that is going to tell you a little bit more about exploration of the moon. That's going to celebrate this week's International Observe the Moon Week that is observed all around the world, also here in CAC. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Me first.
Oh.
Hello again, and let me switch to Polish for a while, for our Polish viewers also. Witamy w Cambridge Innovation Center. Dziękujemy organizatorom za współpracę przy organizacji wydarzenia. W imieniu Polskiej Agencji Kosmicznej witam wszystkich oglądających naszą transmisję online. Mam informację, że oglądają nas między innymi w Gliwicach na Politechnice Śląskiej. Serdecznie pozdrawiamy. Dajcie znać w komentarzach, że faktycznie oglądacie. W Cambridge Innovation Center Polska Agencja Kosmiczna koordynuje działania Cosmic Hubu. Dzisiejsze spotkanie poświęcone jest Księżycowi, eksploracji Księżyca, przeszłości, teraźniejszości i przyszłości. Zanim jednak nasz główny gość, John Hall, zabierze nas na Księżyc, pozwólcie, że dosłownie w kilku zdaniach przedstawię aktualną ofertę edukacyjną POLSA. Po pierwsze, jeszcze przez kilka tygodni trwa konkurs o nagrodę prezesa POLSA na najlepszą pracę dyplomową. Zapraszamy absolwentów studiów pierwszego, drugiego stopnia, jednolitych magisterskich za ubiegły rok akademicki, którzy napisali i obronili prace licencjackie, inżynierskie, magisterskie, tematycznie związane z szeroko rozumianymi badaniami kosmicznymi. Jest to okazja do zdobycia uznania u progu swojej kariery zawodowej. Oczywiście w konkursie są też nagrody o wymiarze finansowym. Po drugie, zapraszamy już na przełomie roku do dołączenia do Rady Studentów POLSA. Jest to grono, które współpracuje ściśle z nami przy organizacji różnego rodzaju wydarzeń. Między innymi w tym tygodniu właśnie odbywa się cykl spotkań na uczelniach, czy też przy okazji innych projektów kosmicznych, okołokosmicznych. Są to osoby z wielu różnych uczelni, bardzo aktywne na tym polu. Po trzecie, POLSA organizuje bardzo często różnego rodzaju szkolenia, warsztaty, webinary. Przykładowo już 25 tutaj w Cosmic Hub będzie organizowany warsztat dotyczący zarządzania ryzykiem w projektach. Natomiast już niedługo ogłosimy także nabór na intensywne szkolenie z zakresu planowania misji. Zachęcamy do śledzenia profili POLSA na naszych mediach społecznościowych. na LinkedInie, na Facebooku, gdzie zawsze są najświeższe informacje i propozycje z naszej strony. Także szczegóły dotyczące tego wcześniejszego konkursu czy naboru do Rady POLSA się tam znajdą. Wracamy do głównego tematu. To spotkanie jest częścią globalnej inicjatywy Międzynarodowa Noc Obserwacji Księżyca, organizowanego, koordynowanego przez NASA. W ramach tego wydarzenia na dedykowanej stronie znajdziecie informacje o transmisjach, wydarzeniach z całego świata, które dzieją się w tym tygodniu. Kulminacja nastąpi 16 października. Na stronie również baza wiedzy o Księżycu, a także podpowiedzi o tym, jak zrobić dobre zdjęcie Księżyca, którym później można się pochwalić, wrzucając zdjęcie poprzez serwis Flickr ze specjalnym hashtagiem. Teraz czas naszego eksperta, John Hall. Teraz w POLSA, ale wcześniej przez wiele lat w NASA, więc nie ma chyba lepszego człowieka, żeby opowiedział nam o historii, teraźniejszości, prognozach dotyczących właśnie badania i zwiększania naszej obecności na Księżycu, powrotu tam już, miejmy nadzieję, wkrótce. W czasie wykładu wrócimy do języka angielskiego. Zachęcamy do zadawania pytań poprzez czat na YouTube. Uprzedzamy, prosimy się nie martwić. W czasie prezentacji mogą nastąpić króciutkie przerwy na odpalenie filmików, ale miejmy nadzieję, że wszystko pójdzie sprawnie. Dziękuję bardzo i oddaję głos Johnowi. Thank you.
Yeah. Może być? Słuchawki? Mikrofon? Już? Okay. Dzień dobry. Niestety moje polskie jest dosyć kiepsko, że byłoby lepiej dla wszystkich, gdybym mówił po angielsku. Natomiast zrobiłem slajdy dla Was po polsku. To mam nadzieję, że to będzie pomocne. I możemy zaczynać, jak jesteście gotów. So, as was mentioned, I spent 25 years at NASA headquarters in Washington as a senior executive and director in our international office, also as a lawyer, and came here to Poland in 2017 after retiring from NASA to live here with my wife and son. And so I've been with the Polish Space Agency now for the last 4 years. Talk a little bit today about the original moon program, the risks, the costs, the benefits, and then the prospects for future exploration of the moon. And welcome your own thoughts on the matter. Just a very famous picture of the moon print. We go to the next slide. We'll give you a sense of. Go ahead to the next slide. Wanted to convey a sense of just how difficult a mission like this was and is even today, and particularly how difficult it was almost 60 years ago. Are we out there? Okay. It had never been done before. We had never placed a human being on another celestial body in our history. And while we had demonstrated the capability to successfully orbit the moon and to successfully return people from space to Earth, we had never actually landed on a celestial body, the moon or anything else, and safely returned the human beings who we landed there back to Earth. So to give you a sense of just what people were contemplating, that this could in fact be a total disaster. This is a piece of a speech that was written by William Safire, who was President Nixon's speechwriter, that he wrote for President Nixon on the occasion of the Apollo launch and landing on the moon, just in case. So it gives you a sense of just how much of a risk it was. And space today continues to be extremely risky, extremely expensive, and full of many, many failures, as well as some just phenomenal successes. So we'll go to the next slide, please. We begin the journey to the moon, at least at NASA, in December of 1957. Go ahead. This is our very first satellite launch attempt. It's December of 1957. And the next slide. And there were a lot more like it. This is actually the payload that survived that explosion, remarkably, it came through in not so bad a condition, but obviously the launch was a failure. Next, nonetheless, just about a month later, the United States successfully launched our first satellite, Explorer-1, which was launched under the direction of someone who was very famous in space exploration, Wernher von Braun, who came to work for the United States after the Second World War and became the director of our Marshall Space Flight Center down in Alabama. And that's where a lot of this equipment was put together. The Explorer-1 satellite was particularly remarkable because, I don't know how many people know what the Van Allen radiation belts are, but these are a couple of radiation belts that exist in our orbit, in our Earth environment, that are very important even today for us to understand for effects of radiation upon spacecraft and human beings as well. So that was done just a month after that spectacular failure that you saw. Next slide. And then we decided that not only were we going to successfully send robotic missions and spacecraft into orbit, as the Russians had already done successfully, we were going to send people as well, which the Russians were similarly just about to do. So we selected a corps of astronauts. They were called the Mercury 7. Next. And these were the guys that were going to begin our space program. Our first astronaut in space to successfully launch into space, not to orbit the Earth, but just to launch into space, was Alan Shepard, who flew on Freedom 7 in May of 1961. Flew up, came down, and was recovered in the ocean. Next. So after just 20 days after that one mission where we put a guy up for a very short while and he comes straight back down, 20 days later, this is showing you the kind of confidence that Americans have. Go ahead. Next. Just 20 days after that little success, the President of the United States says, we're going to the moon. And he meant it, and he was willing to put the money behind the program. Next, please. And he said, you know, the reason that we do this sort of stuff is not because it's easy, but because, in fact, it's hard, and because it's important for our civilization, for human beings as well, and not to mention the point, no small point, that the United States and the Soviet Union were in a very, very aggressive space race by this point. So first one to the moon would be a big prize, particularly since, you know, the Russians had already beat us on everything else. You know, they beat us on first spacecraft in orbit, first man in space, first woman in space. They were really racking up the successes. So the United States needed a big vision, and they got it. Just like I said, just 3 weeks after they had shot a man up, brought him right back down, no orbits of the Earth, no nothing, we're going to the moon. That takes some sort of courage. Next, please. And just a picture of the moon. Next slide has a little bit of details about the moon environment. It's not the nicest place to live. There are better neighborhoods that you could find. But that's where we were going, and that's where we're going again. Next. So we started building the tools that were going to be necessary for that to happen. This is the vehicle assembly building at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It is huge. Full-scale launch vehicles fit in here. The space shuttle fit in here. Actually, 4 of them fit in this building. Next slide. You can see just the stars on the flag on the building are 1 star is as tall as a man. It is a huge building. Next. So the first steps of Apollo were Mercury and Gemini, which gave us a lot of experience on things like orbital rendezvous, that is joining spacecraft together on orbit and in deeper space than just close Earth orbit, which was going to be very important if we were going to launch somebody to the lunar orbit, send them down, bring them back up. They were going to have to somehow join up with the orbiting spacecraft. So all the things that we learned in Mercury and Gemini were very, very important for ultimately the Apollo program. Next. And here's a couple of slides. John Glenn was the first American to orbit the Earth. That was in 1962. Again, long after Yuri Gagarin had done it. And then the first rendezvous. So again, orbital rendezvous of spacecraft was a key technology that needed to be proven through these programs leading up to the eventual Apollo missions. Go ahead. Next. And just a sense, this is actually down at Johnson Space Center, full body of the Saturn V rocket. A little bit of detail on some of these. These slides will be available for anybody who wants them. Next. But again, just like with the launch of Vanguard, Apollo had problems. Not right off the bat, but not too far into the program. We had started Mercury and Gemini back in the very early 60s. January of 1967, we were getting ready to launch our first crew, and inside of an oxygen-rich capsule on the launch stand, doing a test, a spark ignited the whole thing, and killed all of them. Grissom, White, and Chaffee, who were the first astronauts killed in the program. Altogether, in the United States space program, we've killed 17. Next. And this was the launch just 2 years later, 2 years after that horrible accident, was the launch of the Apollo 11 mission in July of 1969, ultimately intending to land on the surface on the moon on July 20th. Next slide, please. And these were the guys. Neil Armstrong and Mike Collins. Mike just recently died. Neil died a few years ago. And Buzz Aldrin is still alive. Buzz was the second man to walk on the moon. Neil was the first. And the thing I love about this picture is something that many people just don't notice. This instrument here on Mike's suit is a slide rule. Any of you guys mathematicians? No? Okay, so long before there was anything called a calculator, you would do logarithms and advanced mathematics on a set of rulers or pieces of wood with a gauge on it. And this was, the first, or what? Not the first. It was the calculator of the era. It was the computer of the era. It's a wonderful reminder of just what they had to work with in order to get this job done. To take a human being and put them on another planet, on another celestial body, and that's your cell phone, calculator, everything right there and then. Next slide, please. And there's a view of the Earthrise in the lunar orbit. Next, please. The departure of the Eagle. That's the landing module, the Lunar Exploration module, the LEM. It's called the Eagle. That was making its way to the moon. This is a picture that Mike Collins took from the command module as Neil and Buzz were making their way down. And this is what some people think happened next. And trigger it. So that's what some folks think happened. Next slide, please. This is what actually happened. But next slide, please. That's Buzz coming off of the lander. It's a picture that Neil took. This is them on the surface of the moon for the first time, July 20th, 1969. Next slide, please. And another. Next slide. And this is them coming home, being fished out of the ocean. Next. And back then, we didn't know what they might bring back with them. So we put them in quarantine. Something that people might have forgotten about until very recently. It was a thing that we did with people. So the first couple missions, the astronauts who came back from the moon had to go through quarantine, and we put them in these trailers, and there they are greeting the president. You know what? I do. I remember the regulations. NASA had to issue them in order to make it legal for them to do it. I think it was, I don't think it was more than just a few days. Yeah. Nowadays, you got to do quarantine if you're going into some place for like 3 or 4 days. I mean, nobody's doing 2 weeks anymore, right? Yeah. So I think it was just a few days. I'll look it up. There's a book of laws that the federal government issues, and NASA had to issue these regulations in this book. It's called the Federal Register. It comes out every day because every day every agency is making new rules and new laws. And I remember the rule that came out about having to put these guys in quarantine. Of course, they did get a nice parade in New York. Next slide. And you know what's remarkable? We've had, 25 World Cups, right? 25 World Cup champions. 46 presidents of the United States, right? Got how many kings of Poland? 260 popes, right? 12 people who have walked on the surface of the moon. That is a very exclusive club. You think it's something to be the Pope? Be the president? Forget it. There's only 12 of these guys, and only about 4 of them are still alive. So, next, please. Next.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
T-minus 60 seconds and counting. We are go for Apollo 7 at this time.
And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good Earth.
We have ignition sequence start. Engines on 5, 4, 3, 2.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man.
With the camera obviously being operated by another astronaut. Those pictures are it's all part of proving that the whole moon program was a hoax. But no, those were composites that were done. Actually, I remember James Cameron, who did Titanic. He came to NASA one year, and I remember him showing some of these collages of photos and how they really impressed him that somebody could do, this kind of, fake imagery. But no, there were never more than 2 people on the surface of the moon at any one time, and there was never less than 2. And that's kind of a rule of just safe astronautical exploration. Okay, so next slide now. So we continued the program with Skylab that lasted for a little more than a year. The Russians, of course, had Salyut. This was a decent program, gave astronauts an opportunity to stay up for a much longer period of time. Again, learning from every single mission. Next slide, please. And then the last Apollo project, even though it didn't go to the moon, was a joint mission that we did with the Soviet Union called the Apollo Soyuz Test Project. And that was in July of 1975. This was the end of Apollo. And it was a way to breathe some life into the détente between the US and the Soviet Union at the time. Next slide, please. And this shows Leonov and Deke Slayton, the commanders of Leonov was the commander of the Soyuz. Deke was commanding the Apollo capsule, and just where they linked up. And one of the things that I'll say about Apollo Soyuz, but about space in a much broader context. There is not a whole lot that works between the United States and Russia today. There just isn't. But one thing that works and has always worked well for the U.S. and the Soviet Union, or the U.S. and Russia, and works well right up to this day with the International Space Station, which has been continually habited by human beings for 20 years in a joint program between the U.S., the European Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, Canadian Space Agency, and the Russian Space Agency, is space. Everything else between the U.S. and Russia sucks. But space is something that brings us together, and I hope that it will continue to bring all sorts of people together as we go forward. Next. So we're going to move now to, after Apollo. I think, did you want to watch that film or not particularly? The one that you were, that you kind of skipped over?
Yeah, we can go back.
If you knew, well, because now I'm going to talk about the global space exploration. So I thought maybe you wanted to do your film. I think it's on slide 32. This is after the astronauts.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because
summary
they are
of
hard.
the lunar program I think you guys might enjoy.
T-minus 60 seconds and counting. We are go for Apollo 7 at this time.
And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good Earth.
We have ignition sequence start. Engines on 5, 4, 3, 2.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return, with peace and in hope for all mankind. We're on our way, Houston.
From 1969 to 1972, we had, a total of 6 moon landings. 12 humans walked on the surface of the moon. We have elevated the human condition. We have improved human lives. We have raised the standard of living for every person on Earth because of space exploration. We're going to go back to the moon, and we're going to take what we learned there, and we're going to go to Mars. We have elevated the human condition. We have improved human lives. We have raised the standard of living for every person on Earth because of space exploration. We're going to go back to the moon. We're going to take what we learned there, and we're going to go to Mars.
Okay, if you want to go to 36. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about our next steps in global exploration. Go ahead. It's called the Artemis program. Next. It involves 2 key new capabilities. One is a crew exploration vehicle that that NASA's contracted for, that will allow for crews to return not just to the moon, but also into deep space. It's being assembled by Lockheed Martin, and a few other U.S. companies. Next slide, please. And the other key technology that's being built is a space launch system, and you'll see something about that in a film that's coming up in just a second. There is a global exploration strategy that is a product not just of NASA's thinking. NASA has joined with about 25 other space agencies, including the Polish space agency, POLSA, to form a consortium of space agencies called the International Space Exploration Coordination Group. And what it has done is it has fashioned a global exploration strategy that seeks to answer the questions, why is it that we want to go back to the moon in the first place? What is it that we hope to do there when we get there? And who all is going to get involved in the program? Well, POLSA is making a bid to join NASA in its lunar program, and may have some news about that in the coming week or so. But it's meant to be a global exploration strategy that reflects the desires and the capabilities and the contributions of countries across the planet. Next slide, please. And there are several key themes that sort of are part of the why are we interested in doing this. Obviously, we're looking to build, to increase international partnerships, increase our scientific knowledge. We've got to do something about ensuring the continuity of the human species. We want to expand economic growth for all countries, and space helps us to do that a lot. So lots of reasons for wanting to do this. Next slide, please. One of the key features of this, and you'll learn a little bit more about it in just a minute, is called the Gateway. And this is a project for a movable sort of space station type of apparatus that would be in cislunar orbit and would allow for resupply from the Earth, transfer of propellants and other essentials to the surface, to the lunar surface, retrieving items from the lunar surface, bringing them back, processing them, and ultimately returning them to Earth, but also as a potential platform for deeper space exploration. Next slide, please. And if you just want to take a look at it by the numbers, it's kind of interesting to take a look at what the Apollo program cost and what the investment in the Artemis program in the next step of the lunar exploration is looking to cost. So we had about 400,000 people who worked on the Apollo program over the life of the program. Today, NASA employs about 17,000 people with another 60,000 contractors. So you have a lot fewer people working on it, but actually very similar budgetary expenditures relatively. NASA's current budget is about $23 billion. That was just a little bit less than the cost of the entire Apollo program. But Apollo cost a lot of money. It cost more than half of the NASA budget. NASA cannot spend half of its $23 billion per year on Artemis, on lunar exploration. They can only spend about a third of that. So they're looking to spend about $7 to $8 billion on the program, and even that is, not everybody's confident that they want that to happen. One of the things that you'll see in the film that we'll close out with is a statement or two or three that NASA is going to return to the moon in 2024. I personally believe that's unlikely. 2024 was a year that was picked by President Trump when he was in office because he thought that he was going to win a second term, and he wanted Americans to return to the moon by the time that he left office. NASA was never thinking about 2024. They were always thinking about 2026. So my guess, and I don't have any, nobody at NASA is feeding me intelligence on this, but I can read newspapers. I think that the ultimate lunar return, where we put the first woman and the next man on the surface of the moon, is going to be probably about 2026. But you'll hear 2024 in the film that's coming up, so let's go ahead and watch that.
All engine running.
50 years ago, we pioneered a path to the moon. The trail we blazed cut through the fictions of science and showed us all what was possible.
It's very pretty out here.
Today, our calling to explore is even greater. To go farther, we must be able to sustain missions of greater distance and duration. We must use the resources we find at our destinations. We must overcome radiation, isolation, gravity, and extreme environments like never before. These are the challenges we face to push the bounds of humanity. We're going to the moon to stay by 2024, and this is how.
This all starts with the ability to get larger, heavier payloads off planet and beyond Earth's gravity.
For this, we designed an entirely new rocket.
The Space Launch System. SLS will be the most powerful rocket ever developed.
And with components in production
And more in testing?
This system is capable of being the catalyst for deep space missions
we need a capsule
that can support humans from launch
through deep space and return safely back to Earth.
For this, we've built Orion.
This is NASA's next-generation human space capsule.
Using data from lunar orbiters that continue to reveal the moon's hazards and resources,
We're currently developing an entirely new approach to landing and operating on the moon.
Using our commercial partners to deliver science instruments and robotics to the surface, we are paving the way for human missions in 2024.
Our charge is to go quickly and to stay, to press our collective efforts forward with a fervor that will see us return to the moon in a manner that is wholly different than 50 years ago.
We want lunar landers that are reusable,
that can land anywhere on the lunar surface. The simplest way to do so is to give them a platform in orbit around the moon from which to transition.
An orbiting platform to host deep space experiments and be a waypoint for human capsules. We call this lunar outpost Gateway.
The beauty of the Gateway is that it can be moved between orbits
It will balance between the Earth and Moon's gravity.
in a position that is ideal for launching even deeper space missions.
In 2009, we learned that the moon contains millions of tons of water ice.
This ice can be extracted and purified for water. It can be separated in oxygen for breathing or hydrogen for rocket fuel.
The moon is quite uniquely suited
to prepare us and propel us to Mars and beyond.
This is what we are building.
This is what we're training for.
This we can replicate throughout the solar system.
This is the next chapter of human space exploration.
Humans are the most fragile element of this entire endeavor, and yet we go for humanity. We go to the moon and on to Mars to seek knowledge and understanding and to share it with all. We go knowing our efforts will create opportunities that cannot be foreseen. We go because we are destined to explore and see it with our own eyes. We turn towards the moon now, not as a conclusion, but as preparation, as a checkpoint toward all that lies beyond. Our greatest adventures remain ahead of us. We are going.
We're going.
We are going.
We are going. We're going.
Okay, and I think that's it. So, thank you very much. If you have other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Sorry for all the technicals. I think we were trying to do a little too much here. But anyway.
Any questions? Yeah.
Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you, John, for this. I have two questions. One is, do you have any guess for a possible time horizon for a man on Mars? The other question would be,
No.
and the other would be, is there like a multi-year frame budget appropriate federal budget to be subject?
Okay, so the answer to both questions is yes. The person who will be the first person on Mars has already been born. Okay, I'm sure of that. When the Obama administration was first planning about a potential human crewed Mars mission, they were talking 2030s. Probably a little, early 2030s, I think would be very optimistic. But, could it be in 15 years? 18 years? Yeah, before 2040? Yeah, I won't be around. We have proven a lot of the technologies that will be needed for sustaining life on Mars already. We know how to keep people alive in very, very challenging environments like the moon. We're demonstrating technologies right now on the moon. There's an instrument that yesterday I was given a presentation at Wojskowa Academy Techniczna about the Mars mission that NASA and a few other countries launched last year. The NASA mission was called Perseverance, but there were also 3 others at that time, and there were 2 others at that time. One from China, one from the United Arab Emirates. And one of the instruments on that mission, that's on the Perseverance rover, is called MOXIE. It's an oxygen generator, and it takes the carbon dioxide atmosphere in Mars and it produces oxygen from it. Now, it's a tiny little thing, okay? Because it had to fit on a rover that was flying to Mars, which ain't exactly next door. But this tiny little instrument is capable of producing up to 10 grams of oxygen per hour, or a couple hundred grams of oxygen per day if you were to use it full blast all the time. Now, what it was able to produce in the time period that it was doing its first test runs was only about enough to keep a human being alive for about an hour. So you could probably run the thing, for about 12 hours. Human beings need about, I don't know, anywhere from 850 to 1,200, 1,300 grams of oxygen a day to live, okay? So this can't produce enough. This can produce about 20% of what would be needed to keep a human being alive. But if you could scale up the capability, you could produce. If you could get a 25-ton MOXIE on the surface of Mars, you could produce enough oxygen, probably not just for keeping crew alive, but also for propellant uses and things like that. Because you'd be able to produce thousands of tons of oxygen. So we already have many of the technological components either already proven or in development that can keep human beings alive on a Martian surface for some period of time. What we don't have, obviously, is a way to get them there. Right now, even at their closest points. So Perseverance and the UAE mission and the China mission, Tianwen 1, they all left Earth in July of 2020. They arrived on Mars or in Martian orbit February of this year. Okay, so that was at least 6 months, more than 6 months that it took to get there, and that's when the planets are in their closest alignment. It only happens once every 18 months, so it. That's why you don't do Mars missions every single year. I mean, you guys probably know about orbital mechanics and things. Anyway, with the current state of technology, and until we get some of these other things proven, sending a person there is a one-way trip. But can it be done in the next 15 years? I'm sure, and that's why I have no doubt whatsoever that the person who will walk on Mars has already been born, and that's a fact. Yes, there are multi-year appropriations. NASA likes to live that way because political and economic winds shift, right? But they still have to go through an annual budgeting process. The administration does. But generally, when Congress says, okay, we agree that we're going to do some program like Artemis or whatever, and we're envisioning a lifetime of, 8 years or whatever it's going to be, they generally provide some of the funding for that. However, in the case of Artemis, Congress has said to NASA, we're not interested in having you guys contract for a certain type of lander. So, NASA's having to rejigger things there. And, you know, it's not just the fault of the politicians. Sorry if this answer is so long, but there's a lot of moving parts in that kind of question. You know, it's not just the fault of politicians or the lack of public support or anything like that. You know, we sometimes are our own worst enemy. We sometimes do these things to ourselves. A good example of this is a mission that's going to launch in December of this year. It's called the James Webb Space Telescope. It's the next generation Hubble telescope. This thing was supposed to launch in 2011 at the latest. I went to the White House in 2007 to argue to allow us to put this spacecraft, which was, at the time was just a little over $1 billion, couple $1 billion spacecraft, on a European launch vehicle, the Ariane 5, right? Because the Ariane was at the time a proven vehicle, and the stuff that the United States had coming online that was going to be ready by 2011 didn't have the track record that Ariane had. So we had discussions with the White House and with the rest of the government about whether we could do that. Can we put this flagship United States mission that costs the taxpayer a whole shit ton of money on a foreign manufactured launch vehicle? Why don't we give the business to some US company? Anyway, it all worked out. ESA's going to fly the thing. It's going to launch in December. More than 10 years late, over $6 billion cost overrun. So it's had a what? Almost 1,000% cost overrun. You know, so if there's skepticism in, you know, some parts of the community that NASA relies upon, and not just NASA, but every other space agency, if there's some sort of, you know, criticism, skepticism, whatever, you know, maybe we earned it. So anyway, but yes, we generally look at, you know, long-term funding for missions if we can get it, and then annually they appropriate the money to pay for it. Sorry for the long answer, but good question. Anything else? Dosh? Okay.
Maybe I do have one question. You spoke about this giant conglomerate of space engines that work for the well-being of humanity. I'll just get one question. Is China involved in
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a corporation. It's a consortium of space agencies, not countries.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not like the UN. It's space agencies, and that's very, very important because space agencies have a different motivation, we believe, than governments do. And space agencies, again, we believe, are less political and have less political interests and more interest in things like science and knowledge and sharing information and all that sort of stuff. So the China National Space Administration is a member of the International Space Exploration Coordination Group, along with 24 other countries. 24 other, see, I made that mistake. 24 other space agencies. And as is Roscosmos, as is the Ukraine Space Agency, as is the UK Space Agency, as is the Australian Space Agency, and CSIRO down in Australia, and KARI, the Korean Space Agency, which incidentally is launching their first launch vehicle, KSLV-2, like next week. Yeah, so that'll be making news. Okay, all right. Dziękuję. Miłego. I turn this off.